Welcome back to Evolutionary Psychology. Let's explore the underlying mechanisms of evolution to gain an intuitive understanding of the process of evolving, which will increase your insight for predicting and perceiving the various theories of evolutionary psychology. Darwin's ideas have had a major impact on our understanding of the relationship between evolution and behavior. Today, we will consider in more detail the foundations that he laid for evolutionary psychology and the contributions made by subsequent evolutionists. Since much of the work on the relationship between evolution and behavior has been conducted on other animals, we consider a number of examples of animal behavior. No understanding of evolution would be complete without considering genetics, so we will cover what exactly a gene is and what it does. The Nobel laureate Herbert Simon once argued that a cow is a man-made object. What he meant was that domestic animals such as cows, chickens, and dogs have been selectively bred for features that humans can take advantage of. In the same way that humans have designed tools from natural materials, we've also customized living organisms to fulfill our needs. Animal breeders have known for centuries that if you mate two individuals with desirable traits, then their offspring are also likely to have the favored traits. If, for example, you breed large-breasted turkeys together and constantly breed the offspring with the largest breast muscles, then over several generations you can subsequently increase the average size of breast muscle in your flock. So in general, by choosing individuals with a particular feature, you can, over a number of generations, create a change in the direction that you have selected. Selective breeding has also been responsible for more radical changes in an organism's physical form. Wide variety of domestic dogs that we see today, from Chihuahuas to St. Bernards, has been created. In only a few hundred years from a primitive wolf-like ancestor, the same applies to plants, with many different vegetables sharing a common ancestral root. As Mark Twain quipped, broccoli is merely a cabbage with a college education. Therefore, many organisms are the way they are today because their traits have been selected not by nature but by human beings in a process known as artificial selection. Let's take a look at artificial selection and dog breeding.
Dogs are a part of our everyday lives, but how did they evolve into the different breeds we see around us today? To find the answer, we must take a journey back through thousands of years when early humans were hunters and gatherers. As humans hunted, wolves would follow, eating the scraps of food they left behind. Eventually, the humans started hunting with the wolves and sharing food with them.
Basically, over time, humans have sort of allowed dogs to come into their village, and especially if they were helpful, they let them live and breed. And over time, that breeding became more and more sophisticated so that they were actually choosing dogs that did things that were useful to them, like help them hunt or help them herd their herd animals like sheep or cattle. And so, over time, it's this artificial selection process of humans choosing which animals would live and which ones would breed that leads to the artificial selection and the formation of these different breeds.
Through artificial selection, humans gradually selected the traits they wanted and created the breeds we have today.
So natural selection is just the process of nature deciding which animals survived and which ones reproduced. Well, artificial selection is very much the same, and it leads to evolution in very much the same way, but it's humans that decide which animals live and which animals can breed with each other. But because they've been under artificial selection for so long, they've evolved down these separate evolutionary paths, if you will. And so the dog breeds are still very different, and you can recognize them easily, but we still consider them the same species because they can interbreed with one another.
With their short, water-resistant coats and webbed feet, Labradors were bred as gun dogs and waterfowl retrievers. The dogs that were the most adept swimmers were prized by breeders and therefore were bred to create offspring that were the best at retrieving ducks and other waterfowl that their owners shot. Greyhounds are known for their speed, and they were selectively bred for hunting. Skinny, aerodynamic dogs were able to catch fast prey, and humans continued to breed greyhounds to be skinnier and faster, resulting in the racing dogs that greyhounds are known as today. The sleeve Pekingese were prized for their tiny size. Members of the Chinese imperial household would take the smallest pup in a litter and then breed it with the smallest pup of another litter. The offspring would then be naturally smaller than the previous generation. This process would be repeated multiple times to create dogs that could be hidden in the spacious sleeves of royals. The Pekingese dog is one of the oldest breeds of dogs, and it is one of the breeds that is most genetically similar to wolves. We can see many differences between modern domestic dog breeds and their wolf ancestors.
The differences can be very subtle because domestic dogs are the descendants of wolves, so they have a lot of the same genes and the same skull elements. But over time, we've selected them to do different things. And so one of the major differences is that the muzzle tends to be longer or shorter in some. The attachment of the muscles that close the jaws can be, stronger in some and weaker in some. And then there's several other different characteristics that change and that are under selection.
So, as you can see, all the various breeds of modern dogs today have come a very long way from their wild wolf ancestors. Through artificial selection, we have managed to turn wild wolves into man's best friend.
In The Origin of Species, Darwin used the evidence of artificial selection to propose a theory of evolution that he called natural selection. This analogy, however, can be misleading. In artificial selection, there is a guiding hand. A human is deciding, according to his own standards, which traits are desirable and which are not. There is also an ultimate goal, such as obtaining turkeys with larger breasts. In evolution through natural selection, there is no known omnipotent being choosing which organism should survive and which should go extinct. Nor is there an ultimate goal that the selection process is trying to achieve. Most biologists think that natural selection plays the most crucial role in evolution, but they do not believe it is the only thing that has led to life being the way it is today. Processes as diverse as disease, climate change, and meteor collisions have played key roles in pruning the tree of life into its present shape. But natural selection leads not only to change, but to adaptive change. Natural selection is based on the differential reproductive success of heritable characteristics which vary in a population. In simpler terms, the engine of natural selection is driven by individuals with different traits having different chances of surviving and reproducing. So, individuals who happen to have advantageous characteristics in their environment will be favored, at least in terms of the number of surviving offspring they produce. Individuals who survive to reproductive age are generally viewed as physically fitter than those that don't, which led to the term survival of the fittest being used as shorthand for natural selection. Fitness has been used in a number of different ways, ranging from its original robust and hardy definition to a technical measurement of fecundity, which refers to an organism's actual rate of reproduction. This has often led to debates between researchers of evolution arguing at cross purposes. During the 20th century, evolutionists began to use the term fitness as a measure of how successful an individual is at reproducing, basically as a simpler term for the individual's lifetime reproductive success. So, for example, if you have 3 surviving children in your life, your fitness will be 3. Although Darwin solved the mystery of the mechanism by which evolution takes place, his solution was only partial. The problem was that Darwin had only a sketchy idea of the mechanism of inheritance, the way in which traits are passed from parent to offspring. It was Gregor Mendel's work on pea plants that ultimately led to the discovery of genes, the true mechanism of inheritance. The results of Mendel's experiments gave rise to important findings that ultimately led to the development of the science of genetics. First, his results showed that traits are created not by a single gene, but by genes which operate in pairs. In sexually reproducing species, a single copy of each gene is passed to the offspring by each of the parental gametes, the male and female sex cells, sperm and egg. Second, his research revealed that the relationship between an individual's genes, now called the genotype, and that individual's physical structure, the phenotype, is more complex than it might appear. Dominant simply means that the existence of a single copy is enough for that trait to be physically expressed, irrespective of the nature of the other gene. Recessive means that for that trait to be expressed, it must have both copies. Mendel found that for pea plants, the yellow pea gene is dominant, written by convention as a capital Y for yellow being dominant. The pea plant is recessive for green peas, written by convention as a small case y. In the notation used by geneticists, the dominant gene is represented by the first letter of the trait it specifies, so the gene for yellow peas is denoted as capital Y. Confusingly, a lowercase version of the same letter is used to represent the recessive gene, so in this case, lowercase y is used for green. It might have made more sense to make it a small g, but that's not how we do it. Big Y dominant for yellow, small y recessive for green. Since in the pea plant yellow is dominant, if a plant inherits a single copy of the yellow gene from either of its parents, then it will have yellow peas. So either big Y, small y, or big Y will yield a yellow pea phenotype. A pea plant with a genotype big Y will have yellow seeds, but so will a pea plant that has big Y, small y. Each has a different genotype, but the same phenotype. We can now see why two plants with different genes for a particular trait can have the same phenotype for that trait. However, the only way to obtain green peas, which are recessive, is for the plant to inherit one copy of the green gene from parent 1 and one copy of the green gene from parent 2, so only small y yields a green pea phenotype. When an organism has two identical copies of a gene, such as big Y or small y, it is said to be homozygous for that trait, since homo means alike. When it has two different copies, such as big Y, small y, it is said to be heterozygous, and hetero means different. Finally, Mendel's experiments show that inheritance is particulate, rather than the result of a process of blending. This means that for traits controlled by single pairs of genes, such as seed color in pea plants, the results are always one thing or the other, either yellow or green, with no half green, half yellow result even possible. One of the mysteries of inheritance was why characteristics found in one parent were often not found in any of the offspring. If plants which breed pure for the yellow peas are crossed with plants which breed pure for the green peas, all of the resulting offspring will have yellow peas. If you then cross each member of this second generation with its siblings, then some of the resulting offspring will once again have green peas, like their grandparents. This observation is impossible to explain for a blending theory of inheritance, since crossing yellow with yellow should never produce green. It was observations such as this which led Mendel to formulate his theory, and his discovery that traits are determined by paired genes went a long way towards solving the problem of traits skipping generations. After conducting a large number of breeding experiments with pea plants, Mendel proposed a number of conclusions which have become known as Mendel's laws of genetics. Inheritance is particulate, meaning that parental genetic material is discrete and does not blend together, with each parent making an equal contribution to the progeny. Characteristics are influenced by genes occurring in pairs, with one contributed from each parent. The complete set of genes of an individual is known as its genotype. Genes exist in at least two or more alternate forms that are called alleles, such as big Y and small y. The location on a chromosome of a particular gene is called a locus. Where there are only two potential alleles at each locus, then three types of gene combinations become possible. In the case of Mendel's pea plants, combinations of genes for pea color exist as big Y, big Y, small y, and small y. When an individual has identical genes at a specific locus, such as big Y, and small y, it is said to be homozygous for that characteristic. In contrast, when an individual has different genes at a specific locus, such as big Y, and small y, big Y, it is said to be heterozygous. The complete description of an individual's characteristics is known as its phenotype. Dominant alleles override recessive alleles in their expression in the phenotype. Recessive genes can be expressed in the phenotype only when they occur in a double dose, as in the homozygous recessive condition, small y, small y. Only one of a pair of parental alleles is passed on to an offspring. Genes for different characteristics are passed on individually rather than being attached to each other, or in the language of genetics, they are segregated. This is sometimes known as Mendel's first law. Phenotypic features that occur together in the adult will not necessarily appear together in the offspring. This is called independent assortment and is a result of segregation. This is sometimes known as Mendel's second law. Note that Mendel never saw a gene or even used the term, which was coined later in 1905. Rather, he postulated that they must exist based on their phenotypic effects in experiments. Although Mendel's laws provided a framework for understanding the mechanism of inheritance, the picture was by no means complete. First of all, Mendel had no idea how his units of inheritance were physically manifested or where they were located. Second, it soon became clear that there are exceptions to most of his original suggestions. To Mendel, sources of variation came from inheriting a mixture of parental genes. However, other processes of which Mendel was unaware have been uncovered since his time, and these have led to a more complex modern-day understanding of genetics, which includes other sources of variation. Let's watch a video review of Mendel's pea experiments.
Between 1856 and 1863, Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk, grew and studied peas. That probably doesn't sound that exciting, but what he learned about genetics changed everything. Let's look at what he did. Mendel bred pea plants, looking for many different traits, like color, or wrinkly or round seeds, or tall or short plants, among other things. Once he had a purebred trait, he would run an experiment. Mendel crossed two purebred traits. We'll look at green versus yellow-colored peas. When the offspring grew, he found that all of the peas were yellow. He couldn't understand why the green trait disappeared. Why didn't the peas have a 50-50 chance of being green or yellow? To explore this further, he took two peas from the first filial, or F1 generation that was just made, and he bred them together. Yes, this is inbreeding, but they're peas, so no one seems to mind. When the second filial generation arrived, F2, 75% of the peas were yellow, but 25% were green. The green peas seem to disappear in the F1, but magically reappear in the F2 generation. What could be happening? Mendel decided that there were factors, which we now call genes. The genes could be either dominant or recessive, and dominant alleles or traits mask recessive alleles. In this case, the yellow is dominant and the green is recessive. So the purebred parents made offspring that had green and yellow alleles, but only the yellow showed because it was dominant. And when the F1 generation bred, there was a chance that they could both give the recessive allele to the offspring, so the green peas showed up again.